The message came through right after my card declined. Not a loud decline, no alarm, just a soft beep at the checkout counter, like the machine was embarrassed for me. The young cashier lifted her eyes slowly. She didn't rush. She didn't sigh. She just waited, her fingers resting on the counter, polite and careful, like people get around old women. Behind me, I felt the line shift. Shoes scraping tile, someone clearing their throat. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice steady. Too steady. I tried again, the same quiet beep. For a moment, I thought it was the machine. These things break all the time. The screen flickered, then settled on the same words again. Transaction declined. My phone buzzed in my handbag. I didn't look at it right away. I paid in cash, the few notes I still kept folded inside my wallet for emergencies, and gathered my groceries slowly. Milk, bread, a small pack of tea I liked when my chest felt tight at night. Outside, the afternoon sun sat heavy and bright, but I felt cold all the same. I leaned against my car and finally opened my phone. The app wouldn't load. I frowned and tried again. No balance, no history, just a spinning circle that went nowhere. Then the message came in. From my son. 3 words, no greeting, no explanation. "Go ahead, beg." I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. I read it once, then again, and again. As if the meaning might change if I gave it enough time. My fingers didn't move. My mouth didn't open. People passed me in the parking lot, laughing, talking, living their lives like the world hadn't just tilted off its axis. I drove home in silence. The engine hummed. The road stretched out ahead of me, familiar and dull. I had driven this route for years, decades even, to work, to school meetings, to hospitals, to his house, back when he still asked me to come. Welcome to my channel, I'm Mama Jo, and before I tell you what happened next, comment where you're watching from. I love seeing how far my stories travel. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new chapter. When I pulled into my driveway, the house looked the same as it always had. Pale walls, neatly trimmed hedges, a place I had paid for brick by brick, year by year, with tired hands and early mornings. Inside, the door clicked shut behind me, and then there was nothing. No television, no voices. No footsteps, just the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, steady and patient. The ticking clock on the wall. Tick, tick, tick. I set the groceries down and sat at the small table near the window. My hands were trembling. Not from fear, from disbelief. I had raised that boy. I had carried him when my back already ached from long shifts. I had skipped meals so he could eat properly. I had trusted him. When he said, "Mom, let me help you manage things." And now this. "Go ahead, beg." I waited for the tears to come. They usually did. I had cried easily these past few years, at commercials, at old songs, at memories that slipped up on me without warning, but nothing came. My eyes stayed dry, my chest stayed tight. I picked up my phone again and typed his name into the contact search. Blocked. I tried the bank's number. Blocked. Even the little savings app he had insisted I download. Gone. Locked behind a password I didn't recognize. He had planned this. The thought settled slowly like dust after a door slams. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't confusion. This was control. I stood up and walked through the house, touching things without really seeing them. The armchair by the window where I used to read in the mornings, the framed photo of him at graduation, smiling wide, his arm around my shoulder like I was his greatest achievement. The light in the hallway was soft and yellow. Evening was coming on. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees, leaves brushing against one another in quiet conversation. I sat back down. The message still glowed on my screen. "Go ahead, beg." I thought of the tone he must have used when he typed it. Casual, almost amused, like this was a lesson he had been waiting to teach. I imagined him checking his phone, waiting for my reply, waiting for panic, waiting for apologies, waiting for me to fold. I didn't give him anything. Minutes passed, then an hour, the fridge hummed, the clock kept ticking. I made myself a cup of tea, hands steady now, the steam rose slowly, carrying the familiar scent of leaves and warmth. I wrapped my fingers around the mug and let it sit there, warming my palms. And then, without meaning to, my eyes drifted toward the small cabinet in the corner of the living room, the one I rarely opened. It sat low to the ground, half hidden behind an old armchair. Inside it were things from another life, papers I hadn't needed in years. folders labeled in my late husband's careful handwriting. I hadn't thought about that cabinet in a long time. My husband used to say, "A woman should never hand over everything she owns, not even to love." At the time, I had laughed and told him he worried too much. I stood slowly, my knees stiff, and crossed the room. The floor creaked beneath my steps, familiar and honest. I knelt down and opened the cabinet. Dust puffed into the air. Old paper smelled faintly of time and ink. I didn't take anything out yet. I just looked. My heart beat a little slower. Behind me, the house stayed quiet, patient, watching. I closed the cabinet gently and stood back up. Whatever my son thought he had done today, he was wrong about one thing. He thought blocking my account meant blocking me, and that was the moment everything changed. Before the blocking, before the message, before my son decided I needed to be taught a lesson, there was a life I lived quietly for him. I raised my son alone. His father left before the smell of baby powder ever settled into the walls of our first apartment. One morning, the door closed, and that was it. No note, no goodbye, just silence and a newborn crying in my arms like he already knew something had gone wrong. I was 24 and afraid, but fear doesn't last long when a child depends on you. It turns into routine, into grit, into waking up even when your body begs you to stay down. I worked double shifts for most of his childhood, sometimes triple if I could get them. Early mornings cleaning offices where no one looked me in the eye. Long afternoons folding laundry at a hotel that smelled of bleach and old perfume. Nights stocking shelves under buzzing fluorescent lights that made my head ache. I learned how to sleep standing up on buses, how to stretch soup for 3 days, how to smile at school meetings even when my shoes had holes in the soles. I wanted more once. I don't talk about that often. There was a time I dreamed of opening a small catering business. I loved cooking. Real cooking. The kind that takes hours and fills a house with warmth. People used to tell me I had magic in my hands when I worked with food, but dreams are heavy things when you're carrying a child alone. So I folded mine away neatly. Told myself there would be time later. There always is, until there isn't. Everything I did with my son in mind. His school fees came first. His clothes, his books, his future. When he got older, I worked harder. When he got sick, I worked more. When he wanted to go to college, I didn't hesitate. I signed loans I barely understood and trusted that love would somehow make the numbers work. And for a long time, he was grateful. At least, I thought he was. He called often, checked on me, brought groceries when my knees started aching too badly to stand in long lines. Told me I didn't need to worry anymore, that he had it covered now. "You did enough, Mom," he used to say. I believed him. When my husband passed, my second husband, the gentle one, who never tried to own me, I felt the world grow quieter in a different way. Not empty, just thinner, like the walls between me and loneliness had cracked. That's when my son stepped in closer. "Let me help you manage things," he said one afternoon, sitting across from me at this same kitchen table. Sunlight spilled through the window, dust dancing in the air like it always had. "Just temporarily, until you get settled." He spoke softly, patiently, like a man explaining something simple to a child. I hesitated. Money had always been the one thing I kept control over, not because I had much of it, but because it was proof I could still stand on my own. "I'm fine," I said. "I've managed this long." He smiled, the kind of smile that looks kind but doesn't quite reach the eyes. "You're getting older," he replied gently. "Things are more complicated now. Online banking, passwords, scams. I don't want anyone taking advantage of you." The word older landed heavier than I expected. I didn't argue. The first step was small. He helped me set up apps on my phone, organized my bills, put reminders in his calendar so I wouldn't forget payments. It felt responsible, loving even. Then came the suggestions. "It's safer this way. Let me hold on to the passwords. You won't need to stress anymore." I remember signing the first paper at the bank. My hand shook slightly, but not from fear. From age, I told myself. From arthritis. He watched me closely as I signed. Too closely. "Just a formality," he said. "Nothing changes." But things did change. Slowly, quietly. I stopped seeing statements, stopped making decisions, stopped knowing how much I really had. When I asked questions, he answered quickly, confidently. "Everything's fine, Mom." I've got it under control. Trust me." And I did, because he was my son, because I had taught him how to tie his shoes, how to ride a bike, how to say thank you and please, how to look a person in the eye when they spoke. I thought that meant something. I didn't notice when help turned into authority, when advice turned into permission, when concern turned into control. The first time I felt a pinch was over something small. I wanted to replace an old chair in the living room. The legs were loose. It wobbled when I sat down. "Do you really need that?" he asked over the phone. "Let's wait a bit." I waited. Then it was groceries. Then it was clothes. Then it was silence when I asked questions he didn't want to answer. I told myself not to be dramatic, that this was just how things were now. The children grow up and parents step back, but stepping back felt a lot like disappearing. One evening, I stood in front of the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Not because of wrinkles or gray hair, those I earned honestly, because I looked unsure, and that scared me more than anything. Still, when he brought the papers, the ones he said would make everything easier, I signed them. He laid them out neatly, explained each page quickly, tapping here and there like a teacher rushing through a lesson. "Just trust me," he said again. "I wouldn't ever hurt you." I believed that too. I signed those papers because I trusted my son, and I had no idea what I was giving away. At first I told myself I was imagining it, that the change in my son's voice was just stress, work pressure, bills, the weight of adulthood pressing down on him the way it once pressed down on me, but something had shifted. Not loudly, not all at once. It crept in through small moments, a pause before answering, a sigh where warmth used to be, a question that felt less like concern and more like inspection. It started with notifications. My phone would buzz with alerts I hadn't asked for, messages about spending, categories, totals, percentages, grocery purchase, $43.27, household expense, $18.90. I stared at the screen one afternoon, the numbers glowing back at me like accusations. That night, he called. "I noticed you went to the store today," he said, casual, almost cheerful. "Yes," I replied. "I needed a few things." "Did you really need brand name tea?" he asked. There were cheaper options. I laughed softly, unsure of what he wanted from me. "It was on sale." There was a pause. "I just think we should be more mindful," he said. "At your age, every dollar matters." At your age. The words slid between us like a thin blade. After that, every purchase became a conversation, sometimes a lecture, sometimes a warning. "You don't need that. Why didn't you ask first? Let's not make impulsive decisions." Impulsive, as if I hadn't stretched pennies into miracles for decades, as if I hadn't lived my entire life calculating, balancing, sacrificing. I stopped buying little things that brought me comfort, flowers from the corner stand, a pastry on Sunday mornings. Even replacement light bulbs sat on my counter longer than they should have. I didn't want to give him a reason to question me. Silence became easier than explanation, and he noticed. When I didn't call for a few days, the tone of his messages changed, shorter, sharper. "You okay? You haven't been spending. Everything fine over there? Over there." Like my life was a location on a map he monitored from a distance. Then his wife got involved. She'd always been polite, smiled often, hugged lightly like she didn't want to get too close. When she spoke, her voice stayed sweet, but her eyes were always measuring. One afternoon, she came over with him unannounced. I was in my old house dress, hair wrapped loosely, hands smelling faintly of onions and oil from cooking lunch. She looked around the living room slowly. "You know," she said, sitting down without asking, "this place could really use some updates." I smiled politely. "It suits me fine." She exchanged a glance with my son. "We were thinking," she continued, "that maybe we should start making some decisions about the house, long-term plans." My chest tightened. "Decisions?" I asked. "Well," she said, smoothing her skirt, "it's just practical. Eventually, these things fall on us anyway." Us. They spoke like the house wasn't still mine, like I was already a guest in my own life. After that, they came more often. Opened cupboards, commented on clutter, suggested changes, moved things. Once I came home from church and found my favorite armchair shifted to the corner. "Oh," my son said when I mentioned it, "it gives the room better flow." I didn't argue. Arguing felt childish. That's how they made it sound. Whenever I tried to assert myself, he softened his voice, the way you do with someone you think might break. "Mom," he'd say slowly, "you're being emotional." That word again. Emotional. It erased everything I felt. When I didn't respond right away to his calls, something else happened. Money became a lever. A bill paid late, a transfer delayed, a technical issue that only affected me. I'd call, confused. "Oh, I'll fix it tomorrow," he'd say. "You should have reminded me," reminded him, as if access to my own money was a favor he granted. Once, after I questioned a delay, his voice hardened. "You know, Mom, if this is too much for you, we can always look into other arrangements." "Other arrangements?" I asked quietly. "Assisted living, something safer, easier." The room spun slightly. "I'm fine where I am," I said. "For now," his wife added gently in the background, "but we just want what's best." They always said that. What's best? It became their shield, their excuse, their justification. I began choosing my words carefully, avoiding topics, shrinking myself so there would be no conflict. Still, it wasn't enough. The monitoring intensified. He questioned cash withdrawals, asked why I needed them. "I like having some on hand," I said. "You don't go anywhere," he replied. "What could you possibly need it for?" I didn't answer. I didn't know how to explain dignity. Then came the day my phone stopped working properly. Apps loading slowly, errors popping up, passwords rejected. When I called him, he sounded annoyed. "I told you not to mess with the settings," he said. "I didn't," I replied. "Well, something happened," he said flatly. "I'll look at it when I have time." That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind move through the trees outside. Shadows shifted across the walls like restless thoughts. I felt small, not weak, small, and that feeling scared me. The next morning, I tried to pay a utility bill online. Denied. I went to the bank app. Locked. I called him. Straight to voicemail. That was when the message came. "Go ahead, beg." 3 words. Clean, cruel, final. Sitting at my kitchen table later that evening, the weight of it pressed down on me fully. This wasn't about money. It was about power. He wanted to see me panic, to see me plead, to hear my voice crack and soften. He wanted to feel necessary. He wanted to feel superior. He wanted to see how desperate I could become. And in that moment, with the house quiet around me and the message still glowing on my screen, I realized something else too. He wasn't testing my limits. He was testing my obedience. And he had no idea what he'd just awakened. That night, sleep would not come. Not the restless kind that comes and goes. Not the shallow drifting, where dreams break apart before they form. This was a wide-awake stillness, heavy and alert, like my body knew something important was about to surface. The house was dark, except for the small lamp near the sofa. Its light pooled softly on the floor, warm and familiar. Outside, the wind brushed against the trees, slow and steady, as if the world itself had decided not to rush me. I sat there for a long time, not crying, not shaking, thinking. My phone lay face down on the table. I didn't need to see the message again. It had already carved itself into me. "Go ahead, beg." I breathed in slowly, then out again. My chest felt tight but not crushed, more like braced. That was when my eyes drifted toward the drawer. It sat beneath the old sideboard in the living room. The one my late husband insisted on keeping even when the legs wobbled and the finish dulled. I had suggested replacing it once. He shook his head and smiled. Some things don't need to be new to be useful. I hadn't opened that drawer in years. Life moved forward. Papers got scanned. Files went digital. Everything became passwords and screens and systems I never fully trusted. But that drawer belonged to another time. A quieter one. A more deliberate one. I stood up slowly and crossed the room. My bare feet made no sound on the rug. When I knelt, my knees protested, but I ignored them. The drawer resisted at first, stiff from disuse. I pulled again, harder this time, and it slid open with a soft scrape, releasing the faint smell of old paper and cedar. Inside were folders, thick ones, edges worn. Labels written in my husband's handwriting, neat, careful, unmistakable. My fingers hovered for a moment, then I reached in. The first folder held copies of deeds, original purchase agreements, dates written in ink that hadn't faded, only softened with age. My name, his name, clear, unmistakable. I flipped through slowly, each page grounding me further. The second folder was heavier. Legal language, clauses, signatures, a trust. I felt my breath catch. I had almost forgotten about it. We'd set it up years ago, not long after my husband retired. He'd been methodical like that, always thinking 2 steps ahead, especially when it came to security. I remembered sitting at the dining table, sunlight spilling across the wood as the lawyer explained things in simple terms. I hadn't been fully engaged then. Life felt stable, safe. My husband had squeezed my hand under the table. "Listen," he whispered, "this matters." The trust wasn't complicated, but it was strong, designed to protect assets, to keep ownership clear, to prevent exactly what my son thought he was doing now. I swallowed. The next folder held correspondence, letters, notes, amendments added later after my husband passed. I had signed them myself, clear-headed, of sound mind, in front of witnesses. I hadn't been confused. I hadn't been pressured. I had been prepared. My heart beat slower now, steadier. I sat back on my heels and kept reading. Ownership papers, safeguards, limitations on authority. I realized then that what my son had control over was narrow. Access, yes. Visibility, maybe. But ownership? No. That had never left me. A strange calm spread through my body, like warmth returning to cold fingers. I leaned back against the sofa and closed my eyes for a moment. And that's when I heard my husband's voice. Not out loud, not the way it sounds in memory when it surprises you. This was clear, intentional. "If anyone ever tries to own you," he had said once, sitting on the edge of the bed as he put on his watch, "make sure you still own yourself." At the time, I had rolled my eyes. "You're dramatic," I teased. "Who's trying to own me?" He looked at me for a long second before answering. "No one yet," he said. "But life has a way of shifting people, especially family." I hadn't understood then. I understood now. I opened my eyes and looked around the room. The same walls that had watched me raise a child, the same floor that had held me upright through grief. The same house my son now spoke about like it was already his. He had forgotten something important. I wasn't careless. I wasn't helpless. And I wasn't unprepared. The trust documents weren't just protection. They were instructions, clear pathways, quiet power. I could feel it now. Not anger, not fear. Clarity. I gathered the folders carefully and placed them on the table. Neatly, methodically. The lamp cast long shadows across the pages, lines of text stretching like roads leading somewhere I had never expected to go. I didn't rush. I didn't panic. I made a list, names, numbers, steps. There was no need for confrontation yet, no need for emotion. Everything had its order. My son thought tonight had broken me. He thought fear lived in my silence, but silence wasn't fear. Silence was space. Space to think. Space to remember, space to act. I returned the documents to the drawer, leaving only one folder out, the most important one. I slid the drawer shut gently and stood up, joints stiff but spirit steady. The clock on the wall ticked on, indifferent. I walked to the window and looked out into the night. The gate at the front of the property stood closed, iron bars dark against the quiet street. For the first time since the message came through, I smiled. Not wide, not triumphant, just knowing. That night, I stopped being afraid, and my son had no idea what was already set in motion. I did not confront him. That was the first decision I made. I did not call to argue. I did not send a long message explaining how hurt I was. I did not remind him of everything I had given. I did nothing he expected. Instead, I woke up early the next morning, just as I always had. The sky was still pale when I swung my legs out of bed. My joints complained, but my mind was clear. I made my tea, the same way I always did, and sat at the table by the window while the house slowly filled with light. Outside, a bird landed on the fence, tilted its head, then flew away again. Life was still moving. So was I. My phone sat beside my cup. I picked it up calmly and scrolled past the blocked apps, past the frozen screens, past the places where my son believed I was trapped. Then I dialed a number I hadn't used in years. The line rang twice. "Good morning," a familiar voice answered, older now, slower, but sharp. I gave my name. There was a pause. "Well," the voice said, warming immediately. "It's been a long time." "Yes," I replied. "It has." We spoke plainly. No drama, no rush. I explained what I needed, and more importantly, what I did not need anymore. There were no gasps on the other end of the line, no disbelief, just quiet understanding. "Come in this afternoon," he said. "Bring the documents." I hung up and moved to the next call, and the next. I spoke to people my son had never met, people who had known me before I became someone's mother, before I became someone's dependent, people who listened when I spoke. Authority was transferred with signatures I remembered how to make. Control reassigned with language I understood better than I had been led to believe. Safeguards activated quietly, efficiently. No raised voices, no slammed doors, just ink, paper, time. In between calls, I dusted the living room, folded laundry, watered my plants. I let the silence stretch. By the third day, my phone buzzed with a message from him. "You okay?" I didn't answer. The next day, another. "You need anything?" Still nothing. I could almost hear the shift in his thinking. The way confidence begins to crack when control doesn't produce the reaction it's supposed to. A week passed. I went about my life carefully, slowly. I paid for things in cash, cooked meals that reminded me of who I had been before everything got complicated. I walked in the mornings, sat on my porch in the evenings, watching the sun lower itself behind the trees. Neighbors waved, cars passed. The world didn't end because my son blocked my account, and that, I knew, unsettled him. His messages grew longer. "Mom, we need to talk. This silence isn't healthy. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Harder for whom?" I imagined him pacing his living room, phone in hand, frustration tightening his jaw. I imagined his wife watching him, asking questions he didn't want to answer. "Why isn't she calling? Did you go too far? She's never been quiet like this." Silence has weight when people expect noise. I let it sit. By the second week, the tone changed. "Let's reset. I was only trying to help. We can fix this if you cooperate." Cooperate, the word sat heavy. I didn't reply. Behind the scenes, things were shifting. Passwords changed. Access narrowed. Authority returned to its rightful place. I followed instructions carefully, took notes, asked questions. No one rushed me. For the first time in years, I felt included in my own life. By the third week, he stopped pretending to be patient. "This isn't funny. You're being stubborn. Do you even understand what's happening?" I understood perfectly. What he didn't understand was that I wasn't stuck. I was waiting. Waiting doesn't look like much from the outside. It looks like weakness, like surrender, like someone sitting quietly while time passes them by. But waiting, when done right, is preparation. I could feel his confidence growing even as his messages grew sharper. He thought my silence meant confusion, fear, embarrassment. He thought I was ashamed to ask for help. He thought I was sitting in this house counting the hours until I broke. And because he believed that, he grew careless. He stopped checking details, stopped being precise, stopped guarding the things he assumed were already his. That's when I knew. The balance had shifted. One evening, near the end of the month, I received a final message. "I'm coming by tomorrow. No question, no warning, no kindness. Just a statement." I sat at the table and read it twice. Outside, the evening air cooled, carrying the scent of damp earth and leaves. The house was tidy, quiet, ready. I didn't respond. I poured myself another cup of tea and watched the steam rise slowly into the air. Then he decided to come over in person. I heard his car before I saw it. The low growl of the engine pulled into the driveway like it owned the place. Gravel shifted under the tires. A door slammed harder than necessary. I didn't move right away. I was standing by the window, hands folded loosely in front of me, watching the gate at the end of the drive sway slightly as it settled back into place. The afternoon light slanted across the living room floor, pale and steady. Everything was clean, orderly, exactly where I wanted it. I had set the table hours earlier, not for a meal, for clarity. A neat stack of folders sat at the center. No clutter, no extras, just what mattered. The doorbell rang, once, sharp, impatient. I took a slow breath and walked to the door. My steps were unhurried, my posture straight. When I opened it, he was already mid-expression, that tight look people wear when they're prepared to scold. He stopped when he saw me, not because I looked different, but because I didn't look broken. "Mom," he said, exhaling like this visit was an inconvenience he had already solved in his head. "We need to talk." I stepped aside without a word. He walked in first, glancing around the house the way people do when they expect to find disorder. Mess, proof of decline. There was none. His wife followed, her heels clicking softly against the floor. She looked past me, eyes scanning the room, assessing, counting. I closed the door behind them. "You didn't answer my messages," he said, already irritated. "I've been worried." Worried. I gestured toward the living room. "Sit," I said. He hesitated, then sat across from the table, leaning back slightly, comfortable, confident. His wife remained standing for a moment before taking the chair beside him. He looked at the folders. "What's all this?" he asked, waving a hand dismissively. "We don't need paperwork. This doesn't have to be complicated." I didn't respond. I took my seat opposite him and placed my hands on the table. They were steady. "I was hoping you'd come," I said calmly. He smiled, relieved, the smile of someone who thinks the storm has passed. "Good," he said. "Then we can fix this. Because the way you've been acting—" I slid the first folder toward him. The motion was quiet, deliberate. He stopped talking. "What is this?" he asked. "Open it," I replied. He glanced at his wife. She frowned slightly, then nodded. He opened the folder. At first, nothing changed. He flipped through the pages quickly, scanning rather than reading. His confidence didn't falter yet. These were just papers, after all. Things he assumed he understood better than I did. Then his brow furrowed. He slowed down. He flipped back a page. "What is this?" he asked again, but this time his voice was different, lower, less certain. "A trust," I said. He laughed lightly. "Mom, I know what a trust is." "Then read," I replied. He did. The room grew quieter. The hum of the refrigerator returned, filling the space between us. The clock ticked on the wall, each second landing clean and loud. His wife leaned closer now, her earlier confidence gone. She reached for the pages, scanning quickly. "This can't be right," she said. I slid the second folder forward. "This one explains it more clearly," I said. My son's fingers tightened around the papers. His jaw clenched. "This says—" He stopped, swallowed. "This says I don't have authority to—" "Correct," I said. He looked up at me sharply. "But I manage everything." "You manage access," I replied, "not ownership." Silence fell heavy. He opened the next folder without being prompted. The color drained from his face. His wife whispered his name, sharp and urgent. "What does it mean?" He didn't answer her. He was reading now. Really reading. Clauses, dates, signatures. My signature, my late husband's. Witnesses, limits, protections, safeguards. He flipped faster now, panic edging into the movement. Pages rustled. His breathing changed. "This—" He shook his head. "This doesn't make sense." "It makes perfect sense," I said quietly. "You just didn't know it existed." He looked up at me then. Really looked. For the first time in weeks, maybe longer, he wasn't seeing an old woman. He was seeing someone he didn't recognize. "You went behind my back," he said. I tilted my head slightly. "No, I went back to myself." "That's not fair," his wife snapped. "We were just trying to help you." I turned to her calmly. "Help doesn't take away someone's voice." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. My son stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. "You can't just change things like this," he said, anger rising. "You don't even understand what you signed." I slid the final document toward him. "I understood exactly what I signed," I said. He picked it up. His hands were shaking now. This was the one he hadn't expected. The one that closed the loop. The one that returned control cleanly and completely. His mouth opened. No sound came out. The room felt different suddenly. Smaller, heavier. The power he had carried in with him leaked out of him quietly, like air from a punctured tire. He sat back down slowly. His wife stared at the papers, her face pale. This means," she whispered. "It means," I said gently, "that what you thought you owned, you never did." My son looked at me, eyes wide, searching for something. Mercy, confusion, a crack. There was none. "You planned this," he said hoarsely. I nodded once. "I prepared." "You waited," he said. "Yes." The words seemed to land all at once. He froze, not dramatically, not loudly, just still. Like someone who has reached the end of a hallway they thought was endless and found a wall instead. I stood up slowly and gathered the folders, stacking them neatly. "I won't be needing your help anymore," I said. Neither of them spoke. "I'll have full access restored by the end of the day," I continued. "You won't interfere and you won't speak to me the way you did again." He swallowed hard. He began. I raised a hand. "No," I said quietly. "We're done talking." I walked toward the door and opened it. They stood up mechanically, shock still etched into their faces. As he passed me, he stopped. For a moment, I thought he might say something meaningful. He didn't. The door closed behind them with a soft click. I stood there, listening to their footsteps fade, the engine start, the car pull away. Only then did I exhale. Not in relief, in clarity. I realized then I was never powerless. I was patient. The house felt different after they left. Not quieter. It had always been quiet, but lighter, like something heavy had been lifted from the walls themselves. The air moved more freely. Even the sunlight looked softer as it stretched across the floor, settling into corners it hadn't reached in a long time. I stood by the door for a moment after it closed, my hand resting on the handle. I didn't shake. I didn't rush to sit down. I simply stood there and listened. No footsteps returning, no angry knock, no hurried apology, just the distant sound of a car pulling away and the slow return of stillness. That was when I knew it was over. Not the relationship. That would take time, maybe never fully heal, but the power struggle. The invisible tug-of-war that had been draining me little by little without my noticing. It had ended quietly. The next morning, I woke before the sun. Habit, mostly. My body had kept its own schedule long after work no longer demanded it. I lay in bed for a few moments, listening to the house breathe around me, then swung my legs over the side and stood up without hesitation. I felt steady. In the kitchen, I made my tea and opened the curtains wide. Pale light spilled in, washing the counters and cabinets in gold. Outside, the trees stirred gently, leaves whispering to one another. I took my phone off the charger. No alerts, no warnings, no restrictions. Everything worked. Later that day, I went to the bank in person. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The building smelled faintly of paper and polished wood. The young man at the counter greeted me with a professional smile, then looked again more carefully as he checked my information. "Yes, Mrs.," he said. "Everything is in order." He slid the paperwork across the counter. Clean, clear, mine. As I signed, I noticed something I hadn't felt in years. Confidence. Not loud, not proud, just settled. When I left, I didn't hurry back to the car. I paused outside, letting the sun warm my face. I watched people move past me, busy, distracted, wrapped up in their own lives, and felt no urgency to catch up. I had nowhere I needed to rush to anymore. Over the following weeks, the consequences unfolded naturally. My son stopped calling. At first, I thought it was pride, embarrassment, the sting of being outmaneuvered by someone he believed had grown weak. Later, I understood it was something else. He had lost leverage. Without control, there was nothing to push with. His wife sent one message, carefully worded. "Polite, we hope you're doing well." I read it once and put the phone down. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The absence of noise was its own answer. I reclaimed small things first. I replaced the wobbly chair in the living room, bought fresh curtains I'd been eyeing for years but never needed, fixed the loose step on the back porch. Each decision felt simple, personal, mine. I started walking in the mornings again, farther than before, letting my legs remember strength, letting my breath find its rhythm. Neighbors noticed. "You look lighter," one of them said one afternoon as we stood by the fence. "I feel lighter," I replied, and it was true. Without someone watching every move, every purchase, every choice, I found myself humming again, cooking meals that took time, letting dishes soak if I felt like sitting a little longer with my thoughts. No one was monitoring my silence. No one was waiting for me to fail. Independence, I realized, isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It settles in slowly, like peace. There were moments, of course. Moments when memory tugged at me unexpectedly. When I passed a store I used to visit with my son, or found an old birthday card tucked into a drawer. I didn't deny the sadness. I let it pass through me, the way wind moves through open windows. Felt, but not trapped. I didn't blame myself anymore. Trust is not weakness. Kindness is not foolishness. What matters is knowing when to stop giving it to someone who uses it as a weapon. One evening, weeks later, I sat on my porch as the sun dipped low. The sky softened into colors that reminded me of old paintings, warm oranges, pale blues, the quiet promise of night. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and watched the street grow calm. A car slowed near my gate, then continued on. I smiled to myself. I wasn't waiting for anyone anymore. I wasn't bracing for the next message, the next test, the next humiliation. My life had returned to me. Not dramatically, not with applause, but fully. As the stars began to appear, I thought back to the moment in the kitchen, the beep at the register, the message on my phone, the words meant to shrink me. "Go ahead, beg." I understood now what my son had been afraid of. Not my anger, not my tears, my silence. Because silence gives you time to remember who you are, time to prepare, time to act, and if there's one thing I know now, One thing I would tell any woman who finds herself standing where I once stood, it's this. If someone tells you to beg, it's because they're afraid of what you'll do if you don't. I'm really glad you're here, my dear. Thank you for sitting with me and letting me share my story. If you enjoyed it, please show me a little love by liking this video and subscribing to my channel. Now listen, my son looked me in the eye and told me I could never reach 1,000 subscribers. So please, help me prove that boy wrong. Let's surprise him together. And I'd love to know more about you. Tell me in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is. It warms my heart to see how far my stories travel. I post new life stories for you every single day. And now, 2 of my most popular stories will pop up on the screen. Go ahead and pick your next one, sweetheart.